My fiancé left me just 3 days before our wedding. One moment I was choosing centerpieces. The next I was staring at an empty ring box, wondering how my life had turned upside down so fast. But instead of collapsing, I found myself stepping into a world of wealth, betrayal, and a secret so dangerous, it changed everything. Stay with me till the end, because this isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about what happens when pain turns into power. My name is Amara Johnson. I'm a nurse in Atlanta, 28 years old, and I've always been the type who gives my all. I worked night shifts, saved every extra dollar, and believed in building a future with someone who loved me. That someone was Caleb Turner. Or at least, I thought it was. Caleb was charming, ambitious, and the kind of man who could make any room light up when he walked in. We had been together for 4 years, and I truly believed he was my forever. Everything was set for the wedding. My dress was hanging in the closet, deposits were paid, and family members had already booked their flights. Then, just 3 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, Caleb looked me in the eye and told me he wasn't ready. That was it. No real explanation. Just a cold sentence that shattered my world. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The shame of calling vendors to cancel, the embarrassment of telling friends and family, the crushing weight of realizing all the money I'd poured into planning was gone. It was unbearable. But what hurt most was the silence. He walked away and left me in pieces. It didn't take long before whispers reached me. Caleb wasn't just not ready. He had been seeing someone else, my cousin. The betrayal hit like a knife in the chest. My cousin, who used to sit across from me at family dinners, smiling and asking about wedding details, was the one he ran to. That truth hollowed me out in ways I can't even explain. For weeks, I moved through my days like a shadow. I worked my shifts at the hospital, plastered on a brave face, but inside I was broken. I could have let it destroy me, but I knew I couldn't stop living. I had bills to pay, patients who needed me, and a future that couldn't wait for me to keep crying. Then came the call that changed everything. Through a contact at the hospital, I was offered a private caretaker role. A reclusive billionaire, Richard Harlow, needed someone trustworthy to manage his care. It was supposed to be temporary, just another job. But stepping into his world would pull me into a storm I never saw coming. One filled with greed, betrayal, and secrets more dangerous than heartbreak. And without even realizing it, my story of revenge had already begun. The first time I pulled up to Richard Harlow's mansion, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. The place didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress. Black iron gates opened slowly after I gave my name, and the long driveway curved past perfectly trimmed hedges that probably cost more than my entire salary. The house itself stretched upward with tall windows and stone walls, cold and intimidating, as if it were warning me to turn back. Inside, the silence was heavy. My footsteps echoed against marble floors, and my eyes darted to the portraits on the walls. Faces of people who looked powerful, proud, and untouchable. But not one of them smiled. Hallways seemed endless. Doors shut tight like secrets waiting to be kept away from strangers like me. Even the air felt different, carrying that faint scent of old money and something colder I couldn't name. I finally met Richard in his private study. He was older than I expected, his hair silver, his body thin, but his eyes, sharp, gray, and piercing, made me feel like he could see every broken piece of me. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "So, you're the nurse," he said, his voice gravelly. "Sit." I tried to hide my nervousness, but he noticed anyway. Somehow he knew. His gaze lingered, and then he said something that made my chest tighten. "You've been hurt. I can see it in the way you breathe." I didn't answer. I wasn't here to talk about Caleb or my cousin or the disaster of my almost wedding. But Richard kept speaking. "Don't think you're alone in betrayal. The people closest to me, they've cut me deeper than any illness ever could." I swallowed hard, unsure if I should respond. Instead, I nodded, and that seemed to satisfy him. He leaned back, closing his eyes, as if the weight of his past was pressing down harder than his failing health. The first days of work were a test. Security guards eyed me like I didn't belong. Staff members whispered when I walked past, their conversations stopping suddenly if I got too close. At night, when I moved through the halls to check on Richard, I sometimes heard muffled voices behind closed doors, angry, hushed arguments that ended the second footsteps approached. One evening, I passed a locked door in the east wing and heard something I couldn't ignore. A man's voice hissed, "If he finds out, we're finished." Another answered sharply, "Keep it quiet. We'll handle her too." My heart thudded in my chest, and I hurried away before they noticed me. I started to piece things together slowly. Richard's children, Darius, Simone, and Jordan, were mentioned often, though rarely with warmth. They visited, but only when money was involved. Their laughter in the hallways never reached Richard's room, and their smiles vanished when they thought no one was looking. Every moment inside that mansion made me feel like I had stepped into a dangerous game. And even though I didn't know the rules yet, I could sense one thing clearly. Richard's family was hiding something big, and sooner or later, I was going to uncover it. The days in Richard Harlowe's mansion began to fall into a strange rhythm. Mornings were quiet, filled with his medications, his breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, and the long silences where he sat by the window staring at the sprawling estate like it was a cage. At first, he kept his distance from me, answering my questions with short grunts or sharp looks. But I didn't push. I just did my job, steady, honest, and without judgment. Over time, he began to soften. One evening, after I stayed late to make sure his breathing treatment was done correctly, he surprised me by asking, "Why do you do this work?" It's not easy watching people fade. I hesitated before answering, but I told him the truth, that I believe people deserve dignity, no matter what stage of life they were in. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Most people don't mean what they say," he muttered. "But you, I think you do." From that night forward, something shifted between us. Richard started talking more. Not much at first, but enough for me to see the cracks in his world. He told me about his children. Darius, the eldest, who carried himself like a prince but only came around when his businesses were failing. Simone, his only daughter, who had charm but spent her life chasing luxury and attention. And Jordan, the youngest, who hid his recklessness behind fake smiles. "They don't visit to see me," Richard said bitterly one afternoon. "They come to collect. That's all I am to them, a bank account." I could hear the pain in his voice, but what struck me most was how lonely he sounded. Despite all the wealth, the mansion, the power, he was just an old man abandoned by the people who should have loved him most. One night, as I was delivering his evening medication, I paused outside the study. His children were inside, voices raised. Simone's sharp tone cut through the door. "Caleb said it would be handled. Stop panicking." The name hit me like a slap. Caleb. My ex-fiancé who had left me days before our wedding. My hands trembled as I leaned closer, trying to be sure. Darius's voice followed, low and angry. "You think he can be trusted? He's not one of us." I froze, my chest pounding. Caleb's name shouldn't have been here. Not in this mansion, not in connection with Richard's children. Suddenly, all his excuses, his quick escape from our life together, made sense in a new, twisted way. Had he left me because of love, or because he had found a way into this family's money? That night, Richard caught me lost in thought. His eyes, sharp as ever, seemed to read my mind. "Don't trust anyone with my last name," he warned quietly. Then, after a pause, he added something that made my blood run cold. "Or yours." I lay awake for hours replaying his words, the voices, and Caleb's betrayal. Something was happening here, something dangerous. And I knew if I wanted answers, I had to start digging into Caleb's connection to the Harlowe family, no matter what I found. It started with whispers in the hallways and glimpses I wasn't meant to see. I had grown careful in the mansion, learning which corridors carried sound and which corners gave you just enough cover to listen without being caught. One afternoon, while taking Richard's evening tray back to the kitchen, I noticed Simone slipping through a side door near the east wing. She was dressed too elegantly for a casual visit, heels clicking against the floor, perfume heavy in the air. I almost let it go until I saw who followed her minutes later. Caleb. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He was supposed to be gone from my life, a wound I was trying to heal. But there he was, walking comfortably into the Harlowe mansion as if he belonged. I ducked back behind the stairwell, pressing my back against the wall. Simone laughed softly, the sound sharp like glass, and Caleb leaned close to whisper something that made her touch his arm. My stomach churned. It hit me then, the truth I hadn't wanted to face. My cousin was nothing more than a distraction, a convenient excuse for Caleb to leave me. His real goal had always been Simone Harlowe. The wealth, the name, the access to everything money could buy. I wasn't enough for him, not because I lacked love or loyalty, but because I couldn't hand him an empire. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment of our relationship, every word he'd said about needing more time and not being ready. Lies. He hadn't left because of doubt. He left because he had found a richer target. I wasn't a fiancé to him. I was a stepping stone, nothing more. The betrayal cut deeper than before, and the pain turned into something sharper, something stronger. Richard noticed my silence the next day. He was sitting in his study, a blanket draped over his thin shoulders, when he asked quietly, "You've seen something, haven't you?" I didn't tell him everything, but I confessed enough. That I had been lied to, that someone I trusted had traded me for wealth. His expression softened in a way I didn't expect. "Strength isn't about never being broken," he said. "It's about standing when others expect you to fall." His words settled deep inside me. For the first time, Richard treated me less like hired help and more like someone who belonged by his side. He started asking for my opinion on matters outside of care. Little details about his estate, conversations about trust and betrayal that seemed to echo my own life. And in that quiet space, as I stood by the window of his vast, lonely mansion, I made a silent promise. Caleb thought he could trade me for Simone's glittering world. Simone thought I was nothing but a disposable shadow. But they were wrong. They had underestimated me. One day soon, they would regret it. The mansion was usually quiet at night, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards feel louder than it should. I had grown used to it, but one evening, as I carried Richard's tray back to the kitchen, I heard something unusual. A faint scraping sound, like a drawer being opened and shut quickly, came from the east wing, the part of the house Richard always kept locked. My pulse quickened. That wing had always felt off-limits, even dangerous. Still, my curiosity pushed me forward. I walked carefully, keeping to the shadows until I reached the long hallway that ended with a heavy oak door. A sliver of light glowed beneath it. I pressed my ear against the wood and caught muffled voices, too low to recognize clearly, but hurried, nervous. Then footsteps echoed inside, and the light vanished. By the time I opened the door, the hall was empty. To my surprise, the door wasn't locked anymore. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. Inside was a room unlike the rest of the mansion. No gold, no paintings, no polished surfaces. It was a private office, messy and chaotic, with stacks of papers, ledgers, and file boxes covering the desk. Dust lay thick on some corners, but certain folders were fresh, scattered as if someone had been going through them in a hurry. I shouldn't have stayed. I knew it, but something inside me told me this was where the truth lived. I pulled one folder closer and flipped it open. My breath caught when I saw the first page, bank statements, inheritance documents, and signatures that didn't look quite right. The handwriting was close to Richard's, but not exact. Forged. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. Property transfers, wire transactions, all leading to accounts that didn't belong to Richard. Someone was bleeding his fortune dry while he was still alive. Then my eyes froze on a familiar name. Caleb Turner. My heart slammed against my ribs. His name appeared again and again, listed as an advisor on secret transfers. Thousands, no millions, of dollars had passed under his name. He wasn't just tied to Simone through some affair. He was working with her and the others to steal from Richard while pretending to build a new life. The betrayal sank in deeper than ever before. Caleb hadn't just broken my heart. He had dragged my name into something criminal, something dangerous. And Richard, sitting upstairs in his study, didn't even know the full extent of what was happening beneath his own roof. I stood in that room for what felt like hours, staring at the evidence, my hands shaking. Every part of me screamed to walk away, to forget what I had seen, but I couldn't. Not anymore. This wasn't just about my heartbreak, it was about justice. When I finally closed the folder and slipped out of the room, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay silent. Caleb, Simone, and the rest of them thought they had everything under control. But now I had their secret, and I was going to use it. I couldn't sleep after what I had found in the hidden office. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's name printed on those documents, tied to money that didn't belong to him. My chest burned with anger, but more than that, with fear. Fear of what would happen if Richard never knew the truth. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't keep it from him, no matter how much it hurt to say aloud. I found him in his study, sitting in the same chair where he often stared out the window. His face looked tired, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Something's on your mind," he said before I even opened my mouth. "Yes," I whispered, my hands trembling. "I need to tell you something. But once I do, nothing will be the same." He motioned for me to sit. So I told him everything, about the noises in the east wing, the unlocked door, and the papers I found. I described the forged signatures, the missing inheritance funds, and finally, Caleb's name scattered across the transfers like a stain I couldn't erase. When I finished, I braced myself for anger, for him to shout or accuse me of snooping. But Richard didn't react that way. He leaned back slowly, his jaw tightening, his eyes heavy with something that looked more like sorrow than rage. "I always suspected," he said at last, his voice low. "I knew my children were greedy, but I never had proof. And Caleb," he shook his head. "So that's the man who broke you." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Richard didn't reach for my hand, but his words carried a weight that felt just as comforting. "You were right to tell me. But for now, you must keep this between us. If they know we're aware, they'll bury everything. I need time to plan my next move." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. Keeping quiet went against every instinct I had, but I trusted him. More than that, I realized how much he trusted me. For the first time, he looked at me not as an employee, but as something more. "You remind me of what family should have been," he said quietly. "Loyal. Honest. If I'd had a daughter like you, maybe things would have been different." His words nearly broke me. I had been abandoned by the man I thought I'd marry, replaced by a cousin, humiliated by betrayal. Yet here was this powerful, lonely man, seeing worth in me where others had not. But outside those walls, the world moved on. Caleb wasn't hiding anymore. News spread quickly that he had proposed to Simone, flaunting their engagement like a trophy. Photos of them smiling at restaurants, holding hands at events, began to surface. Each picture cut into me like glass, but I stayed silent. Let them celebrate. Let them think they had won. I had a bigger game now. And when the time came, Caleb and Simone would lose everything. I learned to move like a shadow inside the mansion. The family thought of me as invisible, just another nurse, someone who would never matter. That was my advantage. It allowed me to listen when I wasn't supposed to slip into corners and catch words that weren't meant for my ears. And the more I heard, the more I realized how deep the rot went. Simone and Caleb weren't the picture-perfect couple they wanted the world to see. Behind closed doors, their voices clashed like knives. I caught them in the library one night, their whispers sharp and heated. "You promised the transfers would be safe." Simone hissed, her voice shaking. Caleb's reply was colder, almost mocking. "Safe? They're safe. Unless you're too careless to keep your mouth shut." I pressed record on my phone, my hand steady for once. Every word felt like fuel for the fire I was building. Another time, I lingered outside the East Wing and heard Simone accuse him of being too slow. "We need more money, Caleb. Father won't last forever, and I won't be left with scraps." Caleb's response cut through me, sharper than anything else I had heard. "You should be grateful I'm here at all. I wasted years with Amara. She was desperate, easy to control. At least you know what you want." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My chest ached, not just from the cruelty of his words, but from the realization that he had laughed at me behind my back even when I gave him everything. The heartbreak I carried turned into something hotter, darker. Rage. I wasn't the victim anymore. Not to him, not to Simone, not to anyone. Later that night, I told Richard what I had recorded. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable until the end. Then he leaned forward, his frail hands folded together, and said something I'll never forget. "If they think you're weak, use it against them. Let them believe you're still broken. That is how you win." His words lit a fire inside me. I realized he wasn't just telling me to protect him. He was teaching me how to fight back. For the first time in months, I felt control slipping back into my hands. So I played the part. Around Simone, I kept my head lowered, speaking softly as if intimidated by her sharp presence. Around Caleb, I avoided his gaze, pretending the sight of him still cut too deep. They believed it. They laughed at me. And while they laughed, I recorded. I gathered files, dates, and numbers. I watched where they hid their papers, memorized their routines, and learned how far their greed went. Piece by piece, I was building the trap they didn't see coming. Caleb had once called me desperate and easy to control. Soon, he would learn just how wrong he was. This time, I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to make him and Simone regret ever underestimating me. The long dining table gleamed under the chandelier's light, polished silver and crystal catching every reflection. Richard had ordered the dinner himself, summoning his entire family with a tone that allowed no refusal. The air was already heavy when I entered the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor. No longer in my plain caretaker's uniform, I wore a dark, elegant gown Richard had insisted I choose. Every eye turned to me as I moved toward him. He gestured calmly to the seat at his right. His daughter's jaw tightened. His son-in-law froze mid-sip. I sat beside Richard, my chin lifted, refusing to shrink into the shadow where they wanted me. To them, I was no longer just staff. I belonged at that table. Simone's glare burned across the table like a blade. She gripped her wine glass as if it were the only thing keeping her from lunging at me. Caleb, however, betrayed himself instantly. His hand trembled as he set down his fork, his lips parting slightly in disbelief. He had expected me broken, hiding. Instead, I carried myself with a quiet confidence that unsettled him. Dinner began with forced politeness. Richard's other children tried to chatter about business, but tension cut through every word. I waited, letting the unease ripen like spoiled fruit. Richard spoke little, only smiling occasionally, his eyes flickering between his ears like a man watching a storm gather. Finally, he set down his glass and cleared his throat. The table stilled. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've decided to change my will." The words dropped like a stone in water. The ripple was immediate. Simone shot up in her chair, her composure cracking. "What? Father, you can't just, after all these years, this is outrageous." Her voice climbed higher, trembling with fury. Caleb reached out, attempting to grasp her wrist. "Simone, calm down. Let's not make a scene." But I leaned forward slightly, my tone smooth, almost conversational. "Oh, Simone, you shouldn't worry so much. After all, everything you and Caleb have been doing with the accounts will surely secure your future." "Right." Her face blanched, the anger slipping into fear for a fleeting moment. Caleb's eyes darted toward me, sharp and warning, but I merely sipped my wine. "Strange," I added lightly, "how the numbers never seem to match in the ledgers. Almost as if someone's been creative." Simone's lips parted, searching for a reply. Caleb tightened his jaw, speaking quickly. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." But Richard remained silent. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the storm breaking before him. He didn't interrupt, didn't scold. He simply watched, letting them unravel themselves. I met his eyes for a brief second, and in that moment I knew, we weren't just eating dinner. This was the beginning of the reckoning. Simone's fury, Caleb's panic, my calm defiance. It was all unfolding exactly as Richard had intended. The feast had been nothing but a stage, and they had already stepped into their roles. The lawyer's office was cool and pristine, its glass walls overlooking the city skyline. I had slipped in early that morning, a folder pressed against my chest like a shield. Inside were the recordings, the bank statements, and the files from Richard's hidden office. Every piece of evidence that tied Simone, her brothers, and Caleb to the theft. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Whitman, listened carefully as I explained, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. When I slid the recorder across his desk and pressed play, the voices filled the room. Simone's shrill demands for more money, Caleb's mocking tone as he spoke about me, their whispered arguments about transfers. Whitman's lips curved into the faintest smile. "This," he said, "is more than enough." That evening, Richard called a family meeting at Whitman's office. The Harlow children filed in, entitled arrogance radiating off them. Caleb arrived last, his arm slung carelessly around Simone's waist, his smirk a mask of false confidence. He didn't even glance at me as I sat quietly in the corner beside Richard. Whitman wasted no time. He opened a leather briefcase, removed the folder, and placed it on the table. "We need to discuss certain irregularities," he began. His voice was sharp, carrying authority. He pressed play on the recording. Caleb's voice filled the room. She was desperate, easy to control. The words cracked through the silence like a whip. Simone's face drained of color. Richard's sons shifted uncomfortably. Then came Simone's own voice, dripping with greed. "If we push the transfers before he dies, we won't have to share a cent." The walls seemed to close in on them. Caleb shot to his feet, eyes wide. This is out of context. She's twisting everything." Simone rounded on him like a snake, her fingers stabbing the air. You set this up, didn't you? You dragged me into this mess. You're nothing but a gold digger." Her words sliced through Caleb's defenses. His face flushed crimson as the room erupted in accusations. The siblings turned on each other, clawing for survival, each more desperate than the last. Richard rose slowly, his cane tapping against the polished floor. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" The room froze. He looked at his children one by one, disappointment etched deep in his weary face. "All these years, and you proved me right. You never cared for me, only for what you could take." His eyes shifted to Caleb, cold and final. And you, thinking you could manipulate your way into my family. You're finished. Whitman slid papers across the table. Mr. Harlow has already signed the revisions. Effective immediately, you are disowned and cut out of the estate. Caleb's knees buckled. Simone screamed. The others protested in vain. But the decision was sealed. I remained silent, watching them fall apart. Caleb caught my gaze then, his mask finally broken, fear and ruin staring back at me. I held his eyes for a moment, calm and unshaken, then looked away. For the first time, I felt the weight of justice settle sweetly on my shoulders. The night after the confrontation, the Harlow estate was quieter than I had ever known it. The echo of Richard's disowning words still hung in the air, and the memory of Caleb's panicked face replayed in my mind like a film on loop. But instead of pain, I felt peace. For the first time in months, the hollow ache in my chest had lifted. Justice had been served, and my part in it was done. The following morning, I packed my things. The mansion's marble floors no longer intimidated me. Its cold wealth no longer impressed me. Richard found me in the foyer, my bag in hand. His frame looked smaller that day, weighed down by both relief and sorrow, yet his eyes softened when he saw me. "You've given me something my own blood never could, Truth," he said. His voice cracked as he pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. "I want you to have this. It's a portion of the estate, enough to secure your future." I held the envelope for a moment, my heart heavy. But I shook my head and gave it back. "I never did this for money, Richard. I just needed to see them exposed for who they really are." He looked at me, almost as if he were seeing his own daughter standing there. His hand trembled as he touched my shoulder. "You deserve the world, Amara. Don't ever forget that." I smiled softly, then turned and walked out, leaving the mansion behind me. Days later, as I returned to my small apartment, a shadow leaned against the doorway. Caleb. His once perfect suit was rumpled, his charm drained into desperation. The smugness that had once defined him was gone. "Amara," he whispered, stepping forward. His eyes searched mine, pleading. "I made a mistake. Simone meant nothing. I was wrong to leave you. Please give me another chance." For a heartbeat, I stood there, staring at the man who had shattered my world. His voice once had power over me, his smile once pulled me in. But now all I saw was weakness, hollow, pathetic weakness. Without a word, I walked past him. My keys jingled as I unlocked the door. Caleb's voice cracked behind me, calling my name, but I didn't turn back. Inside, I set my bag down and exhaled. My reflection in the window caught my eye, stronger, sharper, steadier. No longer the woman who wept over a canceled wedding. No longer the broken fiancé abandoned for wealth. I was someone new, someone unshakable. As I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, my heart felt free. The story of my pain had become the story of my power. "Sometimes," I whispered, almost to myself, "the worst betrayal becomes the beginning of your strength." Caleb thought he broke me, but he only set me free. Do you believe Amara was right to walk past Caleb without giving him a second chance? Or should she have stopped to hear him out? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I'd really love to know. And if stories like this keep you hooked, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next.